Welcome back, dear listeners. You've returned to the strange little town of Dry Hollow, where the shadows breathe, the ground remembers, and the absurd is always just a heartbeat away from horror. Last we spoke, a certain brooding doctor, one Jonathan Fables, cursed with eternal thirst, and his slightly deranged but utterly devoted assistant, Jeffrey Stories, found themselves face to face with a slumbering evil buried deep beneath their unwitting sanctuary. The town in chaos, the curse awakening, and the garlic running out. But this isn't the end. Oh no, dear listener. This is where things grow deeper, stranger, and infinitely more dangerous. So light your candle, draw the curtains close, and let the night settle in your bones. Because tonight we continue with our story. This is Fangs for the Memories, The Hollow Deepens. And here is your recap. Previously in Fangs for the Memories, the ancient Australian vampire, Dr. Jonathan Fables, and his wildly devoted, slightly unhinged assistant, Jeffrey Stories, arrived in the small town of Dry Hollow, Pennsylvania. A sleepy place with secrets far darker than its diner coffee. Fables, cursed to drink blood for eternity after murdering an indigenous family in 1789, tried to keep a low profile. But thanks to Jeffrey's help and a tragically signed fake moustache, they accidentally murdered a gas station owner, summoned the suspicions of a nosy sheriff, and caught the attention of the town's gothic grandma, Mrs. Callahan, who knows exactly what Fables is. The two discovered a deeper evil stirring beneath Dry Hollow, an even older vampire named Silas Kane, buried alive over a century ago by the town's ancestors. The question now isn't just whether Silas will rise, but whether Fables and Jeffrey can survive each other long enough to stop him. Let's find out, shall we? Enjoy. Chapter 7. The cracks beneath. The hollow deepens. It began as most terrible things in Dry Hollow did, with a noise. Not a howl, not a scream, not even Jeffrey yelling at a raccoon again. No, this was something older, a deep, trembling groan from beneath the ground, like the earth was exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. Dr. Jonathan Fables was the first to notice. He paused mid-sip from his goblet. Tomato juice this time, not that the townsfolk would believe him. His keen eyes narrowing as the ancient wooden floorboards of the motel shifted, just slightly, but enough. Jeffrey didn't notice, of course. He was too busy dramatically narrating a conspiracy podcast into a flashlight. "Day 5 in Dry Hollow," he whispered. "The air tastes like soup. The local squirrels are organizing. The doc is brooding in the corner like a handsome gargoyle. And Miss Callahan winked at me yesterday. I fear she knows things. Things." He clicked off the flashlight, then immediately turned it back on. "Also, I think the pipes are talking to me." Dr. Fables set his goblet down. "What did they say?" Jeffrey looked around, then whispered seriously. "They called me some kind of monkey of sorts. Weird." By morning, the town had changed. Potholes appeared overnight. A field behind the church had collapsed into a pit, revealing roots as thick as arms and stone carvings underneath. Twisting symbols no one could read but made people feel vaguely like sneezing and screaming at the same time. Nancy, the waitress from the last call diner, flipped a pancake that levitated for a solid 3 seconds before hitting the ceiling.
"That's it. I quit. I'm gonna go live in the woods." "Yeah,"
she said. The local plumber, Randy, burst into town half foaming at the mouth, claiming the sewer lines were humming Gregorian chants. Then Sheriff McGowan put a sign that read, "Town closed, no vampires, no influencers, or internet cults. Yu's back door, and still the ground rumbled. Fables stood at the edge of the collapsed field, coat billowing in the breeze, gaze narrowed at the exposed stone beneath the dirt. He knelt, brushing away the soil to reveal a single blackened handprint fused into the ancient stone. The lines of it pulsed faintly. "Doc," Jeffrey's voice crackled behind him. "Are you feeling the emotional presence of an elder evil, or am I just getting heat stroke from chewing 6 packets of barbecue sauce?"
"Both," Fables murmured. "This is blood-anchored stone. It's old. Very old."
Jeffrey leaned over his shoulder, eyes wide.
"Is that Silas Kane's handprint?"
"No,"
Fables said slowly.
"It's older than Silas. Much older."
He looked over the field, now webbed with hairline fractures, like the ground was a cracked eggshell waiting to burst.
"Something is trying to come up, and something is pushing it down."
Jeffrey chewed his lip.
"You think it's like supernatural tectonic plates? Like a haunted sandwich?"
Fables just gave him a long, slow blink. Back at Mrs. Callahan's, the old woman was unusually sprightly, sipping tea from a mug that read, "Hex in the City."
"The earth's always been uneasy here,"
she said, slicing into a disturbingly dense fruitcake.
"Dry Hollow was built on top of a boundary, a natural rupture. Think of it like a spiritual hernia."
Jeffrey gagged a little.
"You're very vivid, ma'am."
Mrs. Callahan continued undeterred.
"Long before settlers came, long before Silas was buried, this place was marked, cursed. The spirits of the land never left. They just waited."
Fables folded his arms.
"And now they stir."
She gave a solemn nod.
"There's something you need to see."
They descended into her cellar, past jars of preserved vegetables, stacks of newspapers, and a suspicious number of mason jars labeled, "Don't drink this, Jeffrey." At the very back, beneath a moth-eaten quilt, was a mirror, cracked, blackened, and humming faintly.
"Indigenous tribes called it the Karawari glint.
She said.
A cursed glass. Shows you the blood you still carry and the sins that rot in your shadow."
Fables stepped forward. The mirror flickered. For a moment, just a moment, he saw himself not as he was, but as he had been, standing in the sun, smiling, a young man in 18th century clothing. Then, a scream, a slash of red, a curse, and his face turning pale, eyes sunken, hands soaked in blood. He turned away, jaw clenched. Jeffrey stared at the mirror too. He blinked, then squinted.
Doc, mine just shows me eating a sandwich made of snakes. Is that bad?"
That night, the motel shook. Not like a tremor, like something knocking from below. Fables sat up instantly. Jeffrey had already built a protective garlic fort out of pizza crusts. There was a voice in the floorboards. Not a whisper, not a moan. A single clear rasping word.
"Fables."
He froze.
"Did you hear that?"
Jeffrey whispered.
"That wasn't the pipes."
The ground beneath them split, just slightly. Enough for a black, clawed fingertip to press up from the wood like a flower blooming in reverse. Fables didn't speak. He knelt, palm hovering above the crack. His eyes flickered to Jeffrey.
"He's not rising. He's been calling."
Jeffrey looked pale.
"Called by who?"
Fables looked at the mirror across the room and whispered,
"Me."
Chapter 8. There's something wrong with Jeffrey. In which garlic sweets, lizard brain, and spaghetti cravings all play a role. Jeffrey was sweating. Now, that in itself wasn't unusual. Jeffrey sweated when he ate pancakes, when he ran more than 6 feet, and once, during a sneeze, that startled him. But this was garlic sweat.
Oh, I smell like a cursed olive garden,
he moaned, flopped dramatically across his motel bed like a fainting goat in cargo shorts. Dr. Fables stood by the window, arms folded, eyes narrowed.
That's not normal.
No kidding, Sherlock Nosferatu.
Jeffrey groaned, dabbing his forehead with a towel that now smelled like a melted pizza.
I also can't stop humming Gregorian chants. I can hear dogs thinking about sandwiches, and I crave spaghetti at 3 a.m. without sauce. Who eats dry spaghetti at 3 a.m., Doc?
Dr. Fables turned slowly.
You did. Loudly. I thought you were eating bones.
Jeffrey sat up, wild-eyed.
That's not even the worst part.
He held up a mirror. No reflection.
Well,
Fables said carefully.
That's noteworthy.
They made their way to Mrs. Callahan's house, because every small town has one house that contains all the cryptic answers and smells vaguely of mothballs and destiny. Mrs. Callahan eyed Jeffrey like a baker eyes a defective pie.
You're ripening.
She said, sipping her tea. Jeffrey clutched the arms of her floral couch.
I don't want to ripen. I want to be the lovable, slightly chubby sidekick, not some hybrid freak with night vision and the ability to understand squirrels.
Fables blinked.
You can understand squirrels?
Jeffrey paused.
Only Gary. He's kind of a jerk.
Mrs. Callahan stood and rummaged through a nearby cabinet, pulling out a thick, leather-bound book labeled Accidental Transformations and Miscellaneous Magical Oopsies. She flipped through pages, muttering.
Let's see. Goat poltergeists. Cursed croissants. Ah, here.
She turned the book toward them. Null breeding. A rare mutation formed when a human is repeatedly exposed to vampiric essence, saliva, blood, brooding lectures, without a full draining or transformation. Symptoms may include garlic rejection, mirror disassociation, sudden supernatural sensitivity, inappropriate confidence, enhanced empathy, obsessive snacking, resistance to holy relics, and one hell of a personality shift. Jeffrey raised his hand.
Do I still get to eat real food?
Mrs. Callahan squinted.
I'm sorry, Jeffrey. Only if it has cheese in it.
The mutation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Jeffrey began waking from dreams he couldn't remember, soaked in cold sweat, whispering things in languages he'd never learned. He found himself drawn to cold, damp places like under the sink. He started wearing sunglasses at night, not for style, but because sunlight stung just a little too much. Fables noticed too. There was a quiet moment between them. After another tremor shook the motel, Jeffrey sat on the floor cross-legged, flipping through a cursed comic book, as Fables leaned in the doorway.
You're changing,
Fables said, not unkindly. Jeffrey didn't look up.
Yeah, I know. You mad?
Fables hesitated.
No.
Another pause.
Concerned, but not mad.
Jeffrey smiled, but it was tinged with something Fables didn't like. Distance. That night, Jeffrey disappeared. One moment he was on the bed watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote. The next, the room was empty, save for a half-eaten cheese stick and a whisper in the air.
Come to the deep.
Fables didn't panic. He didn't shout. He simply whispered,
"Oh, for the love of all that's unholy."
then grabbed his coat, his cane sword, and his least dramatic scarf. He found Geoffrey in the collapsed field, standing at the edge of the pit, eyes wide, skin pale, hands trembling.
"Geoffrey."
He called gently. No response.
"Geoffrey, come back now."
Still nothing. Then Geoffrey spoke, but not in his voice. His mouth moved, but the voice that came out was deep, echoing and older than wind.
"You bear the new blood, the hinge between curses. The gate swings wide."
Then he turned, blinked, and said in his normal voice,
Hey, Doc, you ever accidentally host an ancient subterranean entity? Or is that just me?
They returned to Mrs. Callahan's.
So,
Geoffrey said, now wrapped in 3 blankets and holding a crucifix-shaped popsicle.
I'm a null breed, conduit thingy, with a blood curse hitchhiker in my soul pit. Anything we can do about that?
Mrs. Callahan shrugged.
I mean, therapy?
Fables sat down beside him.
"Geoffrey, if your blood really is the key, Silas may try to use you to rise."
Geoffrey sighed.
Man, I knew this would happen. The moment I skip flossing, I'm doomed the world.
He looked up.
Doc, you're not gonna, stab me, are you?
Fables didn't answer, but his silence said,
"Only if absolutely necessary."
Geoffrey offered him a bite of his popsicle. Fables took it. Chapter 9. Holy Rollers, Fang Tokers, and the Garlic Opolypse. It started with a blurry photo, a grainy night vision image of Dr. Fables hissing mid-holy water meltdown, captured by the paranormal investigator back in Chapter 4. The caption read, "Dry Hollow Demon," or just a hot goth in pain. #BloodBay. By morning, it had 700,000 likes, a reaction video set to Billie Eilish, and God help them, Geoffrey in sunglasses doing a TikTok dance called The Brood Drop. Dry Hollow, once famous for a pumpkin that looked like Elvis, had gone viral, and now the hunters were coming. The first to arrive were the Holy Rollers, a group of traveling rogue exorcists with a converted ice cream truck and matching t-shirts that read, "Jesus is my co-staker," led by Father Tom Thunderblast, a former gym teacher turned zealot, with holy water grenades and a megaphone that roared into town shouting, "Vampire, demon, possible lizard people, we are here for you." Then came the Fang Tokers, teenage influencers who filmed dance trends at the site of ancient rituals. At Vamp Daddy XOXO did a steak spin tutorial. At Bat Queen Slay, reenacted Silas Kane's burial but added a fog machine. And Garlic Boy 420 challenged Fables to a garlic bread eating contest and lost consciousness. Geoffrey naturally tried to meditate.
Please, guys, we're on the same team. We hate evil too, and stairs.
Fables stood in the shadows with his coat flared like bat wings, whispering,
"I will incinerate them all."
Sheriff McGowan was this close to a breakdown. He had barricaded Town Hall, issued mandatory curfews, and tried banning garlic because people were stuffing it into gas pumps. Nancy, the waitress, took it a step further. She started baking garlic muffins.
If I'm going down, I'm taking every last one of those fanged bastards with me.
Even Mrs. Callahan had reached her limit. She enchanted her mailbox to bite influencers. Meanwhile, Geoffrey's condition worsened. He began drifting toward the field at night, muttering in sleep, developing an aversion to mirrors that showed his reflection breakdancing. Fables kept watch. He slept in 90-second intervals. He tried once to tell Geoffrey not to post another dance video. Geoffrey replied,
Doc, the algorithm doesn't wait for evil, okay?
It was that day that Fables briefly considered walking into the sun. Then came the tipping point. A Fang toker named at Mystic Batty live-streamed from the edge of the cursed pit, saying,
Y'all, I'm about to summon the spirit of Silas Kane, but make it aesthetic.
She lit 4 bath and bodywork candles, whispered nonsense, and accidentally opened the blood seal. The ground shuddered. A howl echoed through the roots of the town. Cows fainted, Jeffrey burped blood fog, and Fables snapped his cane sword open and said,
Right, that's it.
He stormed into the town square, cloak swirling dramatically, eyes glowing faintly.
Everyone out.
The Holy Rollers shouted something about demons. The Fang Toker started filming. Fables whispered an incantation. The sky darkened. Thunder cracked. All iPhones in a 3-mile radius died simultaneously. Jeffrey gasped.
You killed the Wi-Fi.
Fables hissed.
You're welcome.
The square cleared for now. The town had quieted, tense, watching. Fables stood beneath the old lamppost as Jeffrey approached, holding a fried garlic sandwich like a peace offering.
You good, Doc?
Jeffrey asked gently. Fables closed his eyes.
I miss the 1800s where people were far less loud.
Jeffrey sat beside him.
Hey, I know it's a lot. I'm kind of mutating. The earth is cracking. We're probably cursed, but...
He handed him the sandwich. Fables stared at it.
You do realize this is made of everything I'm allergic to.
Jeffrey beamed.
But it's got love in it.
Fables didn't smile, but his hand didn't incinerate the sandwich either.
Interesting. You're right there, Jeffrey. This isn't burning me. For some reason.
Everywhere else, there were cracks in the ground that were widening, and a voice, a familiar ancient voice, whispered through the roots.
Now breathe. Come. The door is open.
Chapter 10. Well, if it isn't an ancient vampire pit. The hole in the earth was no longer a crack or a pit. It was now something worse. A wound. Open, breathing. By dawn, half of Dry Hollow's churchyard had collapsed into it. The stone well at its centre had cracked clean down the middle, its circular walls now lined with unfamiliar symbols, glowing faintly in the grey morning light. Mist coiled up from its depths, thick and unnatural, smelling of metal and ash. Dr. Fables stood at its edge, silent. Behind him, Jeffrey paced nervously, bundled in a coat far too large for him and clutching a thermos of warm blood coffee. He hadn't slept. None of them had.
You're sure he's down there?
Jeffrey asked softly. Fables didn't answer right away. He lowered himself to one knee, fingertips brushing the stone. Cold, throbbing with energy, the same kind that had haunted his dreams for over a century. A kind of whisper, older than any curse he carried, pushing against his thoughts.
I'm sure,
he finally said. Jeffrey shivered, not from the cold.
You said he was buried alive. How the hell is he still alive?
Fables stood, brushing dirt from his coat.
because Silas Kane was never meant to die. He was created to last, fed by rituals, sealed by blood that wasn't his. What they buried wasn't a corpse. It was a sentence, a vault, one that leaks when the guilt of the land starts to rise.
Jeffrey blinked.
Wait, so it's not just him, it's the place, too.
Fables nodded once.
That's terrifying.
Geoffrey muttered.
Cool. Good morning to us all, then.
They weren't alone. From the mist, Mrs. Callahan emerged, holding an old leather-bound journal pressed to her chest. Her usual wryness was gone. In its place, resolve.
This is where it ends.
She said.
Or it begins again.
He opened it. Pages lined with sketches, symbols, rituals, all dated from the 1800s. The final entry read, "He cannot be killed, but he can be trapped. Not with wood or fire, but with will." Geoffrey leaned over his shoulder.
Will? Like a psychic cage or something?
Mrs. Callahan looked at him.
Blood, intention, a sacrifice of self, but not life. To bind Silas, someone must carry the memory of what happened here. Live with it forever.
Fables turned the page. There was an illustration of a man chained not by iron but by roots, anchoring him to the soil, eyes open, mouth silent. Geoffrey's voice was quiet now.
Doc, you think this is for you?
Fables didn't answer. He had lived so long with the guilt of his past, the violence, the greed, the stolen land. He knew what the spirits beneath Dry Hollow wanted. Not revenge, not destruction, but recognition. The truth laid bare, someone to carry the burden openly, without denial or fear. And perhaps that was the curse all along. Not the thirst, or the sunlight, or the holy burns, but remembrance. A curse that would only release its grip when someone finally admitted what had been taken. He closed the book, looked at Mrs. Callahan.
Can I bind him?
You can,
She said.
but not alone.
Fables turned to Geoffrey.
You felt it. The pull. He speaks through you now.
Geoffrey laughed, bitter and thin.
Yeah, he calls at me at night. No voicemail, though.
You're part of this now, Geoffrey. But I see that you always were.
Geoffrey took a deep breath, then another. He stepped toward the well, looking down into the chasm below.
If I do this, do I stop changing? Am I going to be me again?
No.
Fables said softly.
You'll be something else. Something better.
The mist below churned, and a low sound rose from the depths. Not a growl, not a roar, a voice, calling again.
Jonathan, null, breed, return what was taken.
Fables looked up at the sky, grey, heavy, then down into the pit. He took Geoffrey's hand. Together, they stepped into the mist. No theatrics, no screaming, just silence. The earth trembled, and for a moment, every bird in Dry Hollow took flight. Back in town, the people paused. The tremor was small, but something had changed. Something had shifted beneath them, and Silas Kane was listening. Chapter 11, Twist and Shout, the Null Breed Negotiation. The mist was thicker now, coiling like living smoke as Dr. Fables and Geoffrey descended into the earth's open wound. It wasn't a fall nor a staircase. It felt more like memory pulling them downward. The deeper they went, the quieter it got, until the world above ceased to exist and the only sound was the echo of breath and the faint hum of something vast and buried. The walls around them pulsed, not with blood, but with history. Then silence broke. A voice slid around them.
Jonathan Fables, killer of the first, cursed of the south, thief of fire. Welcome to the hollow beneath.
Fables said nothing. His jaw was tight. his hand still gripping Geoffrey's.
And you,
The voice turned, almost amused.
child of snacks, of impulse, you who swallowed the rot blood, who danced atop forgotten bones. You are new.
Geoffrey opened his mouth, closed it, whispered to Fables.
He's really judgy.
Then the mist parted, and there he was, Silas Kane. He did not look like a monster. He looked regal, human almost. Pale skin like polished marble, silver white hair flowing around shoulders wrapped in ancient cloth and root. His eyes glowed not red, but a sharp, intelligent amber, like the glint of a knife under moonlight.
Let's speak plainly.
Silas said, a voice cool and deep.
I'm awake. The seal is broken. I have waited long enough. This town has been bought, sold, and burned in shadow. I intend to finish what I began.
Fables stepped forward.
You began nothing. You were buried for what you did, fed upon settlers and innocents.
I fed upon what was fed to me.
Silas snapped.
I was summoned, made, used, just like you. Or do you still pretend your curse came from nobility?
Geoffrey raised a hand.
Okay, so, this is cool and tense and all, but I feel like maybe, just maybe, we don't let anyone eat the town.
Silas turned to him. His expression shifted.
Your blood,
He said,
I smell it, not bound by the first curse. Something fractured, something hybrid.
Geoffrey shrugged.
Null breed, baby. Patent pending, of course.
Silas looked intrigued.
You exist between states, neither damned nor pure. A bridge. I've been called worse.
Geoffrey muttered. Fables narrowed his eyes.
What are you thinking?
Silas took a step forward, arms folding.
The curse cannot be lifted, but it can be rerouted, rewritten. A blood pact made with this anomaly. He could carry the weight, balance the scales.
Geoffrey tilted his head.
Wait, like permanently? Not a curse,
Silas said.
a channel. You would tether the old magic, become the guardian of the hollow.
Fables turned to Geoffrey.
That's no small thing. You'd be bound to this place forever.
Geoffrey looked at the swirling mist, the walls of the root, the sleeping fury behind Silas's calm eyes.
Would it still be me?
He asked quietly.
Mostly,
Silas said.
but wiser, stronger, funnier, perhaps. And you'd finally matter.
Fables clenched his fists.
He already matters.
Geoffrey blinked. Silence. Then Geoffrey smiled.
That's the nicest thing you've almost said to me, Doc.
He stepped forward.
All right, let's make a deal.
Silas smiled, but Fables raised a hand.
No deal, not yet. We do this our way.
Silas raised a brow.
And what would that be?
Fables took a deep breath.
We bind you, not beneath the ground, not with chains. with bureaucracy.
Jeffrey gasped.
Oh my god.
Fables smirked.
We give you a title, a function, make you part of the system. You want to feed? You'll get a night permit, a meal voucher system, weekly blood drives, government clearance, regulations.
Silas stared at him.
You mean to civilize me?
Fables nodded.
You want a world? Then live in it, but by our terms.
There was a long, dangerous pause. Then Silas laughed. A low, cold laugh that warmed slightly at the edges.
You're mad,
he said.
Correct,
Jeffrey chimed in.
but like usefully mad.
Silas approached. He stood between them.
Hi.
Except.
He said. Fables blinked.
Really?
I'm ancient,
Silas said.
but even I know paperwork is more eternal than blood.
They shook hands. The ground beneath them sealed, the mist cleared, and Dry Hollow far above stilled. Back in town, Jeffrey stood at a podium in front of a freshly established office, the Bureau of Paranormal Affairs, Dry Hollow chapter. Plastered across the board, now hiring clerks, mediums, and unpaid interns who can see ghosts. Fables leaned on the fence post, watching him proudly, though he would never say it. Silas Kane, now in a business casual black suit, sat filling out paperwork at the back. He muttered,
Where do I list all my previous centuries of experience?
Jeffrey called out,
Under miscellaneous, buddy.
Mrs. Callahan sipped tea beside Fables.
Well, you didn't destroy the town. Nice.
Fables nodded.
We kept the monsters.
Callahan smiled.
And taught them to file taxes. I mean, that's arguably worse. Very well done.
On the rooftop of Bloodwork, the two sat in silence, watching the last of the sun fade over the crooked spires of Dry Hollow. Fables' hair slightly tousled by the wind, sipped from a goblet of tomato juice.
The sky's pink.
He muttered.
Unsettling.
Jeffrey leaned back, sunglasses on, snacking on cold onion rings.
It's called a sunset, Doc. You've seen it 3 times now. Don't act like it's a murder.
Fables sighed.
It's dramatic. I respect it.
Jeffrey grinned.
You're dramatic.
They sat quietly a while longer. Then Jeffrey softly asked,
Do you think it's over?
Fables looked toward the woods. The wind shifted, and somewhere far below the soil, something blinked. He didn't answer. He stood and said,
We're out of onion rings.
Jeffrey nodded.
Then there's only one thing to do.
They both said it at once.
Waffle House.
And just like that, they vanished into the night. Dry Hollow's strangest protectors, the vampire who broke a curse, and the man who made breakfast legendary. Is this the end? Maybe just for now. Loose ends tied, shadows linger. The hollow breathes, but not too loudly. Epilogue. The post never sleeps. A final envelope and a new beginning. The Bureau of Paranormal Affairs, Dry Hollow chapter, wasn't exactly what anyone expected it to be. At first, it was mostly confused townfolk reporting shadowy figures that turned out to be raccoons in trench coats, or strange moans in the wind that were just old man Kirk's clogged chimney. But then, letters started to arrive. Not emails, not texts, physical letters, yellow parchment sealed with wax, written in ink that shimmered faintly when tilted under moonlight. Some were scrawled in languages no one alive spoke anymore. Some bled a little when opened. Some wrote themselves. And each one was addressed to the same two names, Dr. Jonathan Fables and Jeffrey Stories. By week 3, the Bureau had to convert the back storage room into a mail center. A massive corkboard hung on the wall, cluttered with active cases. Each pinned letter represented something strange, unexplained, or actively haunting a Waffle House. Fables, as always, read each one with grim scrutiny. Jeffrey tried to eat one that smelled like cinnamon.
Hell, it bit me back, Doc.
Then, one morning, an envelope arrived, blacker than pitch, cold to the touch. No return address, no stamp. Inside, a note written in perfect calligraphy. There is a demon in Grackle's Hollow. It sings each night under a silver tree. Those who hear it go mad within days. We've tried earplugs. We need professionals. Payment. 1 memory of your choosing. Time is running thin. The last choir of Grackle. Fables looked up from the letter. Jeffrey blinked.
Did they say singing demon?
Fables nodded.
And madness.
Jeffrey grinned.
Road trip?
Fables allowed the faintest, most reluctant smirk.
Get in the car.
Jeffrey already had the keys. As the sun set behind Dry Hollow, the Bureau's door creaked shut behind them. Another job in the books. Another secret to chase. And in the growing quiet, a distant melody could be heard. Not from Grackle. Not yet. But something in the wind had already begun to hum. And so concludes, for now, Fangs for the Memories. So there we leave them for now. Our cursed physician and his unwillingly involving companion, drawn deeper into a hollow that breathes, bleeds, and remembers far more than it should. The earth stirs, the voices rise, and the past refuses to stay buried. But in the dark, dear listener, sometimes it is not the monsters below that concerns us, but the ones we carry within. Thank you for joining me tonight. If the shadows seem a little longer than usual, don't be afraid. It only means you're listening closely. I've been your tale teller, and you've been my delicious company. And before I sign off completely, I want to say a massive thank you to my Patreon supporters. If you think, gee, this little sausage is worth supporting, and I want to see what he can do, well, visit my Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/SFGT. And there you can support me at any tier. All tiers get early access by a week, and all tiers get full 320 kilobytes crisp audio. So I get to be right in your ears. So, let me get my teeth sunk into my first and foremost amazing Ode Night Tea Titan, of which this story is dedicated to. And that is my Ode Night Tea Titan, amazing, marvelous Matto Star. Matto, you are the Jeffrey to my Dr. Fables, quite literally. Quick thinking, detail-loving, wildly dependable, and always ready with the perfect idea and a snack. Your support, feedback, and friendship have been nothing short of legendary over the years. You don't just listen, you enhance. You see through the mist, laugh through the horror, and you've got the instincts of a null breed with Google Calendar access. Dudio the podcast would not be the same without your support. And these stories would never be as energized and out of the wall crazy and fun without your friendship. Thank you for fueling the chaos, the creativity, and the podcast itself, aka me. Your support has been and always will be a game changer. Thank you so much, Matto. Have an absolutely legendary week, Matto. And mate, I cannot wait to continue this story regarding the singing demon. I cannot wait for that set. And I hope you can't wait either. And now I want to jump right on in to my white tea warlords. I'm lucky to have 4 of these legends, and first up is Leathersaurus Rex. Leather, you absolute titan. If Dry Hollow had any sense, it would have just handed you a bench press and let you flatten Silas Kane back into the soil, while Fables would be brooding and Jeffrey was panicking over garlic sweets. You would have just been squatting the cursed well and deadlifting the demon out of the timeline. And you've supported this podcast and me longer than Mrs. Callahan's secret fruitcake recipe has haunted her basement. And your friendship is more solid than a vampire-proof power rack. If there were a gym in Dry Hollow, Leather, you'd own it and rename it Hell-Bent for Leather and Holy Water, and make the undead sign waivers before trying leg day. Thank you so much, Leather, and I hope your gym session is absolutely bangers good. Thanks for your friendship and your support, and have a kick-ass week ahead, mate. And my next white tea warlord, Joseph Wonderful Schroeder, our resident zombie slayer and tactician extraordinaire, the kind of man who'd see the garlic shortage coming a week earlier and still manage to keep the family safe while staking the undead with one hand. If Fables had you in Dry Hollow, Silas wouldn't have made it past chapter 8. Your wisdom, humor, and no-nonsense strategy have sharpened the blade behind the story. And thank you so much, Joseph, for your support. I hope you have a fantastic week ahead of yourself, and thank you again for being my pal. You're awesome. Maya, the Queen of Cats, keeper of secrets, and probable owner of that weird shadow that keeps following me. If anyone could track Silas through fog and misdirection, it'd be you, silently slinking across the rooftops with a dozen glowing eyes at your side. Your mystery adds magic, and your presence always brings elegance with just enough menace, Maya. Legend, thank you so much for your ongoing support and for being my pal. I hope you have a kick-butt week as well, and thank you so much for your support. Have a wonderful week, Maya. Sangeetha Sagar, Dreamwalker and Seer, the one who already knew how this story would end, but graciously let us experience the chaos anyway. Your quiet insight is a thread that connects vision to action, and I imagine even Fables would go to you for guidance.
Though he'd never ever admit it, I really wouldn't.
Your calm clarity through all the madness is pure sorcery. Thank you, Sangeetha, for supporting me and being my pal. Have a absolutely positively wonderful week ahead. And now I want to say a huge thank you to my Earl Grey enforcers and all those that support me in those tiers and around. I am lucky to have Jessica Garcia, Michael Krupp, Seductive Smiles, Jane Gumnick, Paige Kramer, Divided by Zero, Juicebox Andy, Just Heather, Peter Raffaelli, and Chad Warren. Thank you all for your amazing support. And boy, am I lucky to have your awesome selves sending the love my way to push the envelope and deliver more. Thank you so much, mates. And mates, I'll be just around the corner, ready to share some stories next week. But as always, till next we meet.
In the hush of a haunted town where roots run deep and dreams drown down, a whisper woke the sleeping earth to call the curse back to their birth. Fables knelt with hollow breath, Jeffrey danced on the edge of death. Mist and memory thick with grief, and silence spoke through broken teeth. Oh, the hollow beneath, where sins don't die, they grow like wreaths. Blood remembers, stone forgives, but in the dark the hunger lives. Garlic sweats and mirror lies, eyes that see through midnight skies. The boy who joked began to bend into a blade they couldn't mend. Half a man and half unknown, with blood that hummed and dreams that groaned. The curse in him began to stir, and shadows danced when he would purr. Oh, the hollow beneath, where the brave wear down like teeth, where silence hums and singing bones, and every laugh can break a throne. The town turned wild, the garlic flew, with holy water, memes and glue. Influencers danced at dawn, while monsters whispered just beyond. The bureau shook, the mirrors cracked, and Jeffrey swore his snacks fought back. The world went mad, but still they stayed, two cursed souls, half proud, half afraid. Beneath the stone, a voice unbound, the first of fangs in sleep uncrowned. A pact was made, not forged in flame, but stitched with guilt and wrapped in names. No stake, no death, no noble end, but clever minds with rules to bend. A handshake wrapped in red tape law, to tame the beast and drop the claw. Jeffrey rose with wiser eyes, Fables watched the old lies die. A town